The heavy-duty drill bit ground against solid rock, its high-pitched whine an assault on the quiet of the mountaintop. Suddenly, a shower of brilliant orange sparks erupted, a violent, unexpected firework display against the gray stone. The drill seized, bucking hard in Natalie Reed's hands, the torque wrenching her wrists. Her eyes widened, a flash of frustration giving way to sharp curiosity. The sound was wrong. It wasn't the groan of stressed stone or the grating complaint of old mortar, but a sharp, resonant clang that echoed for a moment in the thin, crisp air. She cut the power, her breath misting in the cool afternoon. What could possibly be buried in the foundation of a century-old watchtower? The mountain was supposed to be her sanctuary, a place to rebuild a forgotten tower and a fractured life. But the foundation held a secret, one that sparked with the promise of fortune and the peril of the unknown. She didn't know that this single, jarring moment would change everything. But as she stared at the gleaming metal scar in the rock, one question burned brighter than the sparks. Could a forgotten fortune from the past secure her daughter's future, or would it tear her quiet world apart? Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The small rental house on the outskirts of the mountain town was a bastion of tidy efficiency. Its decor was sparse, dictated by a tight budget and the transient nature of a life still finding its footing, but it was undeniably warm. Sunlight streamed through a clean kitchen window, illuminating the worn but well-loved wooden table where 10-year-old Lily sat, meticulously coloring a drawing of a swirling tornado. On a nearby shelf, a stack of meteorology textbooks with titles like Atmospheric Dynamics and Cloud Physics sat in stark contrast to a single, elegant photo frame. In the picture, a younger Natalie stood on a desert runway, her Air Force uniform crisp, a confident smile on her face as a C-130 roared into the sky behind her. That woman felt like a lifetime away from the one now making toast and packing a lunch of sandwiches and apple slices. Natalie Reed, now in her late 30s, moved with a quiet strength, her observant eyes, the same eyes that had scanned countless horizons for developing storm fronts, now tracking her daughter's progress on her artwork. Life as a single mother was a carefully choreographed routine, a dance of school runs, homework help, and shared meals, all performed with a loving precision that left no room for error. Lily, bright and endlessly inquisitive, was fascinated by her mom's encyclopedic knowledge of the weather, a skill that seemed both magical and immensely practical. "Mom, are you really going to fix the old ghost tower?" Lily asked, not looking up from her drawing. Her crayon was a furious blur of gray and black. Natalie smiled, placing a plate with a perfectly toasted slice of bread on the table. "It's called the Airy Tower, sweet pea. And yes, I am. Someone needs to. People say it's haunted," Lily said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "by the old fire watcher who disappeared in a storm." "It's not haunted," Natalie said gently, her smile softening. "It just needs a little help standing up again, just like people sometimes." She looked past Lily, her gaze drifting towards the window where, far in the distance, the jagged peak of the mountain pierced the blue sky. Her mountain, her project. On the counter lay a stack of official county documents, the thick paper held together by a binder clip. The top page was a permit, issued by the County Planning Commission, granting Natalie Reed the exclusive right to undertake the Airy Tower Stabilization Project. A wave of quiet satisfaction washed over her every time she looked at it. She remembered the town hall meeting with perfect clarity, the stuffy room, the skeptical faces of the council members, and the palpable condescension radiating from the man who had been her competition. Arthur Henderson, a local contractor with a booming voice and a network of good old boy connections, had presented his own bid to tear down the unsafe ruin and, for a hefty price, erect a modern steel observation deck for tourists. He had dismissed Natalie's proposal as the work of a hobbyist, a sentimental amateur playing with historical preservation. Then it had been her turn. She had walked to the podium, not with a slick slideshow, but with a binder full of data. She spoke of the Century Wind, a meteorological event she had painstakingly researched, a confluence of a downsloping katabatic wind and a powerful jet stream anomaly that had produced a gust far exceeding the tower's original design specifications. She laid out a meticulous, cost-effective engineering plan that focused on stabilizing the original foundation and using period-appropriate materials to rebuild the structure, preserving its historical integrity. She presented geological surveys of the granite outcrop and detailed plans for anchoring new supports deep into the bedrock. Her Air Force background, her years as a weather specialist responsible for the lives of pilots, lent her an unshakable credibility. She wasn't just a hobbyist. She was an expert in the very forces that had brought the tower down. The council, impressed by her thoroughness and professionalism, had voted unanimously in her favor. The victory was more than just a permit. After leaving the service, Natalie had felt adrift, a highly skilled professional in a civilian world that had little use for someone who could predict microbursts over a desert. The tower project wasn't about money. It was about purpose. It was a mission. It was a way to connect with the raw, untamable power of nature she understood so well, and to build something lasting, something her daughter could look up at and see as a testament to strength and perseverance. The mountain offered a sense of peace she hadn't felt since her days in uniform, a quiet solitude that soothed the frayed edges of her spirit. The ascent was a battle. The winding dirt road that snaked its way up the mountain was less a road and more a scar, a treacherous track of ruts and loose gravel that clawed at the tires of her old pickup truck. The engine whined in protest as she navigated the steep incline, the chassis groaning with each lurch and dip. This was her first official trip up to the site since winning the permit, the bed of the truck loaded with tools, a generator, and the first batch of supplies. As she climbed higher, the world below transformed into a green ocean of pine and fir, a rolling expanse of wilderness that stretched to the horizon. The air grew thin and crisp, carrying the clean, sharp scent of pine needles and damp earth. Then she saw it. Rounding a final, sharp bend, the ruins of the airy tower came into view, and the sight stole her breath. It was a skeleton, a ghost of a structure silhouetted against the vast, empty sky. Timbers, bleached gray by years of sun and snow, were splintered and shattered. The steel supports were twisted into grotesque shapes, a testament to the wind's unimaginable force. The entire wreck was perched precariously on a granite outcrop that fell away into a dizzying drop. The foundation, a patchwork of river rock and crumbling old mortar, was cracked and broken, looking as fragile as a bird's nest. The sheer scale of the challenge was daunting, a physical manifestation of every doubt she had ever had. For a moment, Henderson's mocking voice echoed in her mind. "You're in over your head." She parked the truck and walked slowly towards the ruin, her boots crunching on the gravel. A surge of both fear and exhilaration coursed through her. The view was breathtaking, a 360-degree panorama of jagged ridges and deep, shadowed valleys under a sky so vast and blue it felt infinite. She recalled her time in the service, tracking storm fronts over desert landscapes, a world of beige and brown, of flat, endless horizons. This vibrant, vertical world was a new kind of challenge, a new kind of beauty. A hawk circled on a thermal high above, its cry a lonely, wild sound. A sense of ownership, of profound responsibility, settled over her like a physical weight. This wasn't just a project anymore, it was a duty. She walked to the edge of the foundation, the wind whipping her hair across her face, and ran her hand over the cold, rough stone. The mortar was gritty, crumbling to the touch. She could feel the history in it, the echoes of the men who had built it a century ago, hauling these same rocks up this same mountain. She looked out at the endless green expanse, a kingdom of trees that had been guarded by this very spot for generations. In the silence of the mountaintop, with only the wind as her witness, Natalie Reed made a silent promise, a vow to the mountain, to the memory of the tower, and to the unseen watchers who had come before her. She would not let it fall. She would bring it back. The weeks that followed blurred into a rhythm of sweat and stone. The mountain became Natalie's entire world, a vertical landscape of grueling labor and quiet triumph. A montage of her days would have shown a lone figure against a vast wilderness, a study in relentless determination. She cleared debris, her muscles burning as she hauled splintered, weather-beaten timbers away from the foundation. She mixed concrete by hand in a heavy wheelbarrow, the rhythmic scrape of the shovel a constant companion to the whisper of the wind. Her hands, once skilled at calibrating sensitive weather instruments, became calloused and strong, learning the language of rock, mortar, and steel. She carefully mapped every inch of the existing foundation, her notes and sketches as precise as any meteorological chart she had ever drawn. A small, sputtering generator provided the power for her tools, its drone a tiny, man-made heartbeat in the immense silence of the wild. Her body ached in ways it hadn't since basic training, a deep, satisfying soreness that spoke of honest work and tangible progress. She ate simple lunches packed in a cooler, perched on a rock overlooking a sea of green, the world spread out below her feet. Often, in the late afternoons, Lily would come up, dropped off by a friendly neighbor at the base of the mountain road. She would help by collecting interesting rocks, her pockets bulging with quartz and granite, or by sitting in the cab of the truck, drawing in her sketchbook, her own world of imagination unfolding alongside her mother's monumental task. These were the moments Natalie cherished, Lily's bright presence a reminder of why she was pouring her soul into this pile of rock and ruin. One afternoon, the familiar crunch of tires on the dirt road announced an unwelcome visitor. A cloud of dust billowed up as a large, clean pickup truck, a stark contrast to her own mud-splattered vehicle, pulled to a stop. Arthur Henderson swung himself out of the driver's seat, his arms crossed over his chest, a smirk playing on his lips. He surveyed the scene, his gaze lingering on the bags of cement and the neat stacks of cleared debris, his expression a mixture of derision and disbelief. "Still playing in the dirt, Reed?" he called out, his voice booming with false bonhomie. "You're in over your head. This ain't a sandcastle." Natalie didn't stop her work. She was troweling a fresh layer of mortar into a wide crack, her movements steady and deliberate. She glanced up at him, her expression unreadable. "I've got it under control, Henderson," she said calmly, her voice even and clear. "The county seems to think so, too." He chuckled, a dismissive, rumbling sound. He walked closer, kicking at a loose stone near the edge of the foundation. "You get one good storm, one of our autumn squalls, and this whole pile of rocks is coming down the mountain. You and your kid should be careful up here." He let the threat hang in the air for a moment before turning and walking back to his truck, leaving a trail of dust and doubt in his wake. His visit rattled her more than she wanted to admit. It wasn't his condescension, but the casual, almost gleeful way he had mentioned the danger to Lily. It planted a tiny, cold seed of doubt in her mind. Was she being reckless? But as she watched his truck disappear down the mountain, the doubt hardened into something else, a fierce, protective resolve. This was her project. This was her mountain, and she would prove him and everyone like him wrong. The work continued. The corner of the foundation that had borne the brunt of the tower's collapse required deep stabilization. According to her plans, she needed to drill a series of deep holes into the granite bedrock beneath the old footing, holes where she would anchor new steel rebar, knitting the old foundation to the mountain itself. The work was precise and demanding. She measured and marked the drill points with the focus of a surgeon. Sweat beaded on her forehead, trickling down her temples despite the cool mountain air. She positioned the heavy-duty drill, leaned into it with her full body weight, and squeezed the trigger. The bit whined, biting into the old concrete and the stone beneath. It was slow, jarring work. Then it happened. The scene from her recurring thoughts, the one that had started this whole journey, played out in reality. The drill bit, deep within the foundation, ground against something that was not rock. A high-pitched shriek of protesting metal filled the air, and a shower of brilliant orange sparks erupted from the drill hole, a violent, beautiful spray against the dull gray stone. The drill seized, bucking hard in her hands, the torque wrenching her wrists. The sound was a sharp, resonant clang, a pure, metallic note that seemed to hang in the air long after she had cut the power. Her mind raced, her training kicking in. Analyze the unexpected. It wasn't an old survey marker. The metal was too hard. It wasn't a piece of forgotten construction equipment. The clang was too solid, too deep. The spark was unusual, like flint striking high-carbon steel. She put down the drill, her hands trembling slightly from the vibration and the adrenaline. Her first instinct, to apply more force, was replaced by a surge of caution and intense curiosity. She fetched a small trowel and a stiff-bristled brush, tools she used for the delicate work of cleaning and preparing the old stonework. Kneeling on the hard ground, she began to carefully excavate around the point of impact. The soil, gravel, and old mortar were packed as hard as concrete, a dense matrix of time and pressure. It was slow, painstaking work. She scraped and brushed, her focus absolute. The minutes stretched into an hour, then two. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long, dramatic shadows across the mountainside. Lily would be expecting her soon, but she couldn't stop. She was on the verge of something. Finally, her trowel scraped against something flat and unyielding. She brushed away the last of the gravel, and her breath caught in her throat. Glistening dully in the fading light was a flat, rusted metal surface. It was the top of a box. A new kind of energy surged through her, a mixture of adrenaline and profound disbelief. She worked with a renewed, almost frantic urgency, her heart pounding against her ribs. She grabbed a long pry bar and a shovel, abandoning the delicate trowel for tools of leverage and force. She dug around the object, her movements fueled by a rising tide of excitement. It was larger than she had imagined, much larger. A heavy-duty steel chest, at least 3 feet wide and maybe 2 feet deep. As she cleared more of the foundation away, she made a startling discovery. It wasn't just buried. It was integrated. Heavy iron bands were cross-braced over the top of the chest. Their ends sunk deep into the original concrete footing, locking it into the very bones of the tower. This chest hadn't been hidden, it had been entombed. The chest itself was a relic from another time. Its surface was pitted with a century of rust, but the steel beneath was fundamentally solid, a testament to the quality of its construction. A large, complex lock, as rusted as the rest of it, guarded its secrets. Freeing it was an immense physical challenge. She wedged the tip of the pry bar under one of the iron braces, putting her entire weight against it, her muscles straining, her boots slipping on the loose gravel. The metal didn't budge. She repositioned, finding a better angle, leveraging the bar against a solid piece of granite. She pulled again, a groan escaping her lips from the effort. There was a sharp crack, not of metal but of old mortar. Then, with a great, deep groan of protesting steel, one of the braces bent upwards, pulling a chunk of the foundation with it. Tasting victory, she worked with a feverish intensity, attacking the remaining braces until, finally, the chest was free. It sat in the hole, massive and silent. It was far too heavy to lift, but with a final, desperate burst of strength, she managed to drag it a few feet away from the hole, its metal bottom scraping and screeching against the rock. She sat back on her heels, covered in dirt and sweat, her body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline, and just stared at it. The mountain was utterly silent except for the sound of the wind whistling through the ruined timbers of the tower. The chest felt ancient, a time capsule from a world she could barely imagine. Lily's innocent comment about the tower being haunted came back to her, and a shiver that had nothing to do with the cooling air traced its way down her spine. She couldn't leave it on the mountain. The thought of Henderson or anyone else stumbling upon it was unbearable. Using a combination of levers, planks, and sheer, grunting willpower, she managed to wrestle the impossibly heavy chest up a makeshift ramp and into the bed of her pickup truck. She covered it with a tarp, her movements furtive and quick, as if unseen eyes were watching from the darkening woods. The drive down the mountain was a blur. Back at her small rental house, the lights were off. Lily was staying with a friend for the night, a small blessing of timing that felt like fate. Natalie pulled the truck into the small, detached garage and closed the door, plunging the space into near darkness. She had to get it open. Now, prying at the complex lock was useless. It was a solid mass of rust. There was only one way. She retrieved her angle grinder, a tool she used for cutting rebar and rusted bolts. Taking a deep breath, she put on her safety glasses, and touched the spinning disk to the lock's hasp. A fresh, violent shower of orange sparks erupted in the dark garage, illuminating the space in brilliant, flashing bursts. The noise was deafening, a high-pitched scream of metal on metal that felt like a sacrilege in the quiet suburban night. She gritted her teeth and pressed on, guiding the grinder with a steady hand. Finally, with a sharp crack, the ancient lock broke apart. Silence rushed back in, thick and heavy. Her hands were trembling as she reached for the heavy lid. It lifted with a low groan of rusted hinges. The air that escaped from within was not the smell of decay she expected, but a dry, clean scent of old paper and oil. The inside of the chest was lined with thick, dark oilcloth, perfectly preserved, and nestled within that lining were stacks of thick, sealed manila envelopes, their paper yellowed with age but still crisp. At the very top lay a single, smaller envelope, its paper thick and creamy, a notary's seal embossed in one corner. With trembling fingers, she carefully lifted the top envelope and broke the brittle wax seal. Inside were not documents but currency, thick stacks of it. She pulled one out. It was a gold certificate, a $1,000 note from 1928, its intricate design and golden seal looking regal and impossibly old. Her breath caught. She opened another and then another. They were filled with gold certificates and bearer notes, currency that was as good as cash to whoever held it. She set them aside, her hands shaking too much to count, and turned to the notarized letter. The handwriting inside was an elegant, looping script, the ink faded but perfectly legible. It was a letter from a man named Alastair Finch, a name she recognized from her historical research. He had been a timber baron, a man who had owned most of the mountain and the surrounding forests a century ago. The letter told a story of guilt and atonement. In the dry summer of 1922, a devastating fire had swept across the ridge, consuming thousands of acres of old-growth forest. Finch wrote that he blamed himself. His logging operations, driven by profit, had left behind a tinderbox of flammable slash and debris. To atone for his sin against the forest, he had secretly funded the county's first volunteer fire crews and personally financed the construction of the Airy Tower. He wrote that he had no heirs he trusted with his fortune, calling them vultures in waiting. So, he had decided to entrust this cash, his forest's fortune, to the future. He was leaving it for the one person he knew he could trust, a person he would never meet, the keeper who saves the tower, should it ever fall into ruin and need a guardian. He estimated the value of the contents at over $100,000. $100,000. In 1928, Natalie's mind, trained to make quick calculations, spun. She did a rough estimate accounting for nearly a century of inflation, the conversion from gold certificates to modern currency, the intrinsic value of the notes themselves. The number that flashed in her mind was staggering, so large it seemed unreal. It was easily in the millions. She read the final lines of the letter, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Use it to guard the mountain, but first, guard your own. Shock, utter world-altering shock. It washed over her, leaving her weak and breathless. She sank to the cold concrete floor of the garage, the letter clutched in her hand, the stacks of unimaginable wealth sitting in the open chest before her. The weight of the discovery was heavier than the steel chest itself. This wasn't just money, it was a legacy. It was a mission passed down through time. It was a responsibility that made rebuilding the tower seem like child's play. The Baron's final line, a message from a ghost across a century, spoke directly to her soul, a command from one guardian to another, a parent to a parent. The sum was life-changing, world-breaking. A quick, more precise calculation confirmed her initial shock. It was $8.7 million. Sleep was an impossibility, a distant shore she couldn't reach. Natalie paced the small, worn linoleum of her kitchen, the silence of the house amplifying the whirlwind in her mind. On the table, illuminated by the stark glow of the single bulb above, lay Alastair Finch's elegant letter and a single, heavy gold certificate. They felt like artifacts from a dream, too real to be ignored, too fantastic to be believed. Her mind, A place usually ordered by logic and data was a chaotic storm of desire and duty. $8.7 million. The number echoed, a seductive whisper that promised an end to every struggle. She thought of her modest but persistent debts. She thought of Lily's future, of a college education she wouldn't have to borrow a lifetime of wages to afford. She pictured a house, a real home with a yard, a place where they could put down roots, a place that was truly theirs. The money was a key, a universal key that could unlock every door that had ever been closed to them. The phrase from the old notes haunted her. Bearer notes. Whoever holds them owns them. She could just take it. She could pack up the truck, take Lily, and disappear. They could start a new life somewhere else, a life of ease and security. No one would ever know. The chest was entombed in the foundation, its existence a secret for 100 years. Who would miss it? The temptation was a physical thing, a pressure in her chest, a sweet, cloying poison that promised relief from every burden she carried. She could guard her own, just as the Baron's letter had instructed. But her gaze kept drifting to the framed photograph on the shelf. The young woman in the Air Force uniform stared back, her expression clear and confident. Natalie remembered the oath she had taken, the weight of the uniform, the profound sense of integrity that had been drilled into her until it was part of her DNA. Her job had been to provide certainty in a world of chaos, to be a voice of calm, unwavering truth when lives were on the line. Could she look at that woman? Could she look at her own daughter, knowing she had built their future on a secret, on a fortune that was, at its heart, meant for something more? She thought of what she wanted to teach Lily about right and wrong, about the difference between what you can do and what you should do. The Baron's words came back to her, a complex equation. Guard your own, he had written, but that was the second clause. The primary intent, the main clause of his final wish, was guard the mountain. The money wasn't a prize, it was a tool. It was a responsibility. As the first, pale fingers of dawn crept over the distant ridges, painting the sky in shades of gray and lavender, a decision settled over her. The storm in her mind broke, leaving behind a quiet, resolute calm. She would report it. She had to do it by the book, transparently and correctly. The risk of keeping it a secret, the constant fear of discovery, was a prison she refused to build for herself and her daughter. But more than that, the moral cost was simply too high. She had promised to save the tower, and that meant honoring the full legacy of the man who built it. She finally felt she could breathe again. The law office of Maria Sanchez was on the second floor of a historic brick building in the county seat. It was a small, cluttered space that smelled of old books, lemon polish, and freshly brewed coffee. Bookshelves overflowed, stacks of legal binders leaned at precarious angles, and a large, sleepy golden retriever lifted its head from a rug in the corner as Natalie entered. Maria Sanchez herself was a woman in her late 60s with kind, intelligent eyes, a cascade of silver hair pulled back in a simple clip, and a presence that was both grounding and immensely reassuring. She listened patiently, her hands wrapped around a warm mug, as Natalie, her voice nervous and quiet at first, explained the entire, unbelievable story. To prove she wasn't delusional, Natalie had brought the notarized letter and a single $1,000 gold certificate, which she had carefully placed in a protective plastic sleeve. She had also taken dozens of photographs with her phone, documenting the chest, its location in the foundation, the iron braces, the contents, and the process of opening it. She laid them out on Maria's large, mahogany desk like pieces of a puzzle. "I don't know what to do," Natalie finished, her voice barely a whisper. "The letter says it's for the keeper who saves the tower. I guess that's me. But it feels wrong to just take it. It feels like stealing from a ghost." Maria Sanchez looked from the photographs to the impossibly old currency, then to Natalie's earnest, worried face. She gave a slow, thoughtful nod. "You were right to come to me, Natalie," she said, her voice calm and steady. "And you were right to feel that way. This is what's known in legal terms as a treasure trove case, and they are very, very complex. In some ways, Mr. Finch's letter is essentially a non-traditional will, a testamentary document with a very specific beneficiary condition." She leaned forward, her expression serious but kind. Your instinct was the correct one. Our path forward is to file a petition with the county court. We will declare the find, present the letter as evidence of intent, and assert your claim based on you fulfilling the conditions he set forth. We need to be completely transparent. It is the only way to make the funds legally and rightfully yours, and more importantly, it's the only way to protect you. Maria went on to explain the process in detail. They would have to notify the state and the county, as both could have a potential claim on abandoned property, though the letter made that unlikely. The contents of the chest would have to be professionally appraised and then held in escrow by the court until a judge could rule on the petition. And, she warned, it would all become a matter of public record. Once we file, the story will be out, Maria said gently. And a story like this, Natalie, is like honey to flies. People might come out of the woodwork. Distant relatives of Finch you've never heard of, historical societies, other contractors. Anyone with a half-baked claim will see an opportunity. You need to be prepared for that. Your quiet life is about to get very loud. The storm broke with the force of a flash flood. The court filing, a dry public document, was discovered by a stringer for the local newspaper. The next morning, the story was on the front page, in bold, dramatic headlines. Local woman finds timber baron's lost fortune in tower. The story, with its irresistible elements of history, a struggling single mother, and a fortune of $8.7 million, was electric. It didn't just go local, it went viral. By noon, the first news van, a satellite dish gleaming on its roof, had pulled up across the street from her small rental house. By evening, there were 3. Reporters camped outside, shouting questions whenever she dared to peek through her curtains. Her phone rang incessantly with calls from numbers she didn't recognize. Her quiet, anonymous life was shattered into a million pieces. The public scrutiny was a physical weight, a constant, oppressive presence. People in town, people she saw every day at the grocery store or the post office, now looked at her differently. Some were openly congratulatory, their smiles wide and eager. Others were visibly envious, their eyes narrowed with suspicion, their whispers following her as she walked away. She tried to shield Lily from the worst of it, but it was impossible. Lily came home from school, her face clouded with confusion. "The kids at school are saying we're rich," she said quietly. "They asked if we're going to buy a castle." The most venomous attack, however, came from a familiar source. Arthur Henderson saw his opportunity and seized it with both hands. He immediately filed a competing claim with the court, his legal argument asserting that his initial bid for the project had been more comprehensive and that he, as a professional licensed contractor with a local business, should be considered the rightful keeper of the tower and its legacy. He gave interviews to every news crew that would listen, standing in front of his fleet of shiny trucks, painting Natalie as a rank amateur who had simply stumbled into dumb luck. "She's a nice lady, but she's a hobbyist," Henderson said, his face a mask of feigned concern on the evening news. He stood with his arms crossed, looking directly into the camera. "She's completely in over her head. That tower needs a professional, someone with the resources and experience to do it right. That money was meant to protect the mountain, and that requires a serious, long-term plan, not just a lucky find by someone playing with rocks." Natalie watched the broadcast, her stomach churning. He was twisting her purpose, her mission, into a caricature of incompetence. She felt exposed, attacked, and utterly alone. Her quiet life, the simple, focused world she had built for herself and her daughter on that mountain, had been invaded and torn apart. Her resolve, once as solid as the granite bedrock she had been drilling, was being tested daily, eroded by the constant wave of attention, envy, and public doubt. The county courtroom was small, with worn wooden pews and a faint smell of old paper and floor wax. But on the day of the hearing, it was packed to the rafters. Every seat was taken by reporters with notebooks poised, local townspeople whose faces showed a mixture of curiosity and judgment, and the key players in the strange, unfolding drama. Natalie sat beside Maria Sanchez, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Across the aisle, Arthur Henderson sat with his lawyer, looking confident and smug, occasionally nodding to acquaintances in the crowd. The hearing began. Henderson's lawyer, a slick man in an expensive suit, went first. He argued technicalities, citing county ordinances about construction permits, professional liability, and the legal definition of a contractor. He painted a picture of Henderson as a pillar of the community, a responsible businessman who was better equipped to manage such a significant civic asset. Then it was Maria's turn. She stood and spoke, her voice calm and measured, but with an underlying current of steel. She didn't argue technicalities, she argued intent. She presented Natalie's honorable discharge from the Air Force, her spotless service record. She submitted Natalie's detailed plans for the tower, the same ones that had won her the permit, highlighting their meticulous research and engineering soundness. She showed the judge the photographs of Natalie's work on the foundation, the careful, painstaking labor she had already invested. And she emphasized the most crucial point, that Natalie had immediately and honestly reported the find, choosing transparency over personal gain. The turning point came when Maria called Natalie to the stand. Walking past the rows of staring faces, Natalie felt a tremor of fear, but as she sat down and swore the oath, a familiar sense of calm settled over her. This was just another briefing. The stakes were high, but the truth was on her side. Maria asked her simple questions at first about her background, about how she came to be interested in the tower. Then, she asked her why she felt she was the rightful keeper. Natalie took a deep breath and looked directly at the judge, an old, stern man with a deeply lined face and tired eyes. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and steady, gaining strength with every word. "When I was in the Air Force, my job was to predict the unpredictable, to see what was coming over the horizon. I tracked storm systems that could endanger our pilots. The Airy Tower did the same thing. For almost a century it was a sentinel. It stood guard. Mr. Finch, the man who built it and left that chest, he understood that. He didn't leave that fortune for the person with the most equipment or the biggest company. He left it for the person who cared enough to climb that mountain and save it. I am that person." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the silent, captivated courtroom. "I didn't go up that mountain looking for a treasure. I went up there to fulfill a promise I made to myself, to build something that would last. Whether I have $1 to my name or $8 million, I will finish rebuilding that tower. It's my mission." A profound silence filled the room. The judge stared at Natalie for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, he picked up Alastair Finch's letter, which had been entered into evidence. In a clear, resonant voice, he read the entire letter aloud, from the story of the fire to the final poignant line. "Use it to guard the mountain, but first, guard your own." He set the letter down and looked over his spectacles at Arthur Henderson, whose smug confidence had evaporated, replaced by a sullen scowl. Then his eyes moved to Natalie, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something like a smile in them. "The intent of Mr. Alastair Finch could not be clearer," the judge declared, his voice booming in the small room. "He was not creating a fund for a commercial enterprise. He was passing a torch. He was seeking a guardian, a keeper who saves the tower. Ms. Reed, through her demonstrable character, her proven commitment, and her unimpeachable integrity in reporting this find, has proven herself to be that keeper." He banged his gavel, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "The court rules in favor of the petitioner, Natalie Reed. The legal award is granted." A wave of relief so profound it almost brought Natalie to her knees washed over her. It was over. She turned to Maria, tears welling in her eyes, and hugged her tightly. As she and Maria walked out of the courthouse, blinking in the bright afternoon sun, the crowd of reporters and onlookers parted to let them through. But their faces were different now. The suspicion and envy were gone, replaced by looks of respect, and in some cases, genuine admiration. They saw her now not as a lottery winner, but as a guardian who had just, against all odds, earned her post. The funds, when they were finally officially transferred, felt less like a windfall and more like a responsibility taking on a new, tangible form. The final, after-tax amount, a number that still seemed fictional when she saw it on the bank statement, was just over $6 million. Natalie sat in a plush leather chair in a quiet, wood-paneled office, the kind of place she had only ever seen in movies. Across the polished desk, a kind but businesslike financial advisor, recommended by Maria Sanchez, looked at her expectantly. Natalie's first action was not to look at real estate listings or car brochures. Her first action was to honor a promise made to a ghost. Working with Maria and the advisor, she laid out her plan. It was simple, direct, and to the advisor, utterly baffling. She was establishing a new, legally ironclad entity, the Erie Trust. "You could do anything with this money, Ms. Reed," the advisor said, leaning forward, his pen hovering over a notepad. He was trying to be helpful, to open her eyes to the world of possibilities that had just opened up to her. Global travel, investments, a portfolio that could generate wealth for generations. "Are you sure you want to lock up such a large amount right from the start?" Natalie met his gaze, her expression calm and certain. The whirlwind of temptation she had felt in her garage seemed like a distant storm, a front that had passed long ago. "I'm not locking it up," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I'm putting it to work." That was the whole point of the letter, of the money itself. It was never meant to sit still. She slid a piece of paper across the desk, a simple, handwritten list of her intentions. "I want to place $2 million into the trust. This purpose will be twofold. First, to fund the perpetual maintenance and upkeep of the Erie Tower, ensuring it never falls into ruin again. Second, to provide annual grants to the county's underfunded volunteer fire departments and our local search and rescue teams." The advisor stared at the paper, then back at her, his professional composure momentarily slipping. He had managed the fortunes of lottery winners and tech millionaires, people who spoke of yachts and vacation homes. He had never had a client whose first priority was funding a volunteer fire department. "That's very generous," he managed to say. "It's not generosity," Natalie corrected him gently. "It's fulfilling the terms of an inheritance. Alistair Finch wanted to guard the mountain. This is how we do it." She looked over at Maria, who gave her a small, proud smile. The rest of the money, an amount that was still staggeringly large, was more than enough. "The rest," Natalie finished, a weight lifting from her shoulders she hadn't even realized was still there, "is more than enough for my daughter and me." In that moment, signing the papers that brought the Erie Trust into existence, Natalie felt she had finally, truly taken possession of the fortune. It was no longer a burden, a secret, or a temptation. It was a tool, an instrument for good, and she was the one who would wield it. She had honored the Baron's primary wish, and in doing so, had solidified her own character, not as a woman who got lucky, but as a woman who understood duty. With ample funding, the work on the mountain accelerated with breathtaking speed. The lonely, sputtering generator was replaced by a powerful, quiet industrial model. A small, dedicated crew of 3 skilled builders, men from the next town over who were grateful for the work and intrigued by the project, now made the daily ascent. But Natalie remained firmly in charge. She wasn't a distant benefactor writing checks from a comfortable office. She was the site foreman, the lead engineer, the first one to arrive and the last one to leave. She was there every day, her hands still deep in the work, her clothes still covered in sawdust and mortar. She hired the crew not just for their skills, but for their attitude, a quiet professionalism that respected the mountain and the history of the place. She insisted on using the best materials money could buy. The new foundation was reinforced with a web of steel rebar, anchored so deep into the granite that the tower would now be an extension of the mountain itself. The timbers for the cabin and its supporting structure were dense, fire-resistant Douglas fir, shipped in from Oregon. The tower that rose from the ruins was not just a replica of the old one. It was a testament to resilience, an improvement in every conceivable way. It was stronger, safer, and built to withstand not just a century wind, but two. The rebuilding was a symphony of construction. The heavy timbers were lifted into place by a crane that had been painstakingly brought up the mountain road. The cabin at the top, with its 4-sided catwalk and large glass windows, took shape piece by piece, a phoenix rising from the ashes. Natalie worked alongside her crew, swinging a hammer, running the saws, her expertise earning their quiet, unwavering respect. They didn't see her as a millionaire. They saw her as a builder. One crisp autumn afternoon, as the project neared completion, Lily came up the mountain, her face alight with excitement. The main structure was finished, the cabin was weatherproof, and only the final details remained. One of the builders, a kind, bearded man named George, handed Lily a small paintbrush and a can of forest green paint. "Every sentinel needs its finishing touch, little one," he said with a wink. Under Natalie's watchful eye, Lily carefully, meticulously, painted the last section of the wooden railing on the catwalk. Her tongue stuck out in concentration. She applied the paint with a seriousness that mirrored her mother's own focus. When she was done, she stood back, a proud smudge of green on her cheek, and looked at her work. It was a small contribution, but it was hers. It was a moment of shared triumph, a daughter putting her own small mark on the legacy her mother was building. The final pieces were installed. A state-of-the-art suite of modern meteorological equipment, powered by a solar array on the roof, was mounted alongside a beautifully restored antique brass weather station, a relic Natalie had found in an architectural salvage yard. It was the perfect fusion of past and present, of new technology and timeless purpose. When the last window pane was set and the final coat of sealant applied, the crew packed their tools for the last time. They stood with Natalie on the granite outcrop, looking up at the finished tower. It gleamed in the late afternoon sun, its new wood glowing warmly, its windows reflecting the vast, blue sky. It was no longer a ruin or a ghost. It was a proud, living sentinel standing guard once more. The first dry season arrived with a sky of brilliant, cloudless blue and a persistent, warm wind that rustled the pine needles and carried the scent of dry earth. Natalie, now an officially registered volunteer fire watcher for the county, took the first shift. She had bought a modest but comfortable house in town with a small portion of the remaining funds, a home with a yard for Lily and a garden for herself. But the tower, this small cabin suspended between earth and sky, this was her true home. She sat in a simple wooden chair in the quiet of the cabin, the panoramic view a breathtaking, ever-changing masterpiece. The world unfolded in every direction, a tapestry of green ridges, deep blue shadows, and distant, hazy peaks. The only sound was the soft, intermittent crackle of the radio on the desk and the gentle whistle of the wind as it moved around the corners of the cabin. She was not an owner, she was a steward, a link in a chain that stretched back 100 years. Lily was with her, curled up in a comfortable armchair in the corner, a thick fantasy novel open in her lap. She had her own world to explore, but she loved being here, in the quiet company of her mother, high above the rest of the world. The cabin smelled of fresh pine from the new wood and the faint, clean scent of the oil used to polish the brass of the antique weather station. Natalie's hand rested on the smooth, worn handle of the Osborne fire finder, the circular map and sighting scope that was the traditional heart of any watchtower. She felt a profound connection to the long-dead Baron, Alastair Finch, and to all the anonymous watchers who had come before her, men and women who had sat in this same spot, their eyes scanning this same horizon. She looked out at the vast, unbroken expanse of green, the same view she had first seen from the ruins, but everything was different now. The fear and the doubt were gone, replaced by a deep, abiding sense of peace. This was it. This was the purpose she had been searching for ever since she had taken off her uniform for the last time. It wasn't in the millions of dollars sitting in a bank, it was here in the mission. The tower, the sky, the wind, this was her place. She had found her sanctuary, not by escaping the world, but by finding her perfect place within it. Far to the west, she could see the faint, dark line of a weatherfront building over the distant coastal range, and she watched it with a familiar, professional interest. Later that day, as the sun began its slow descent, casting a golden, syrupy light over the landscape, Natalie's trained eyes caught something. It was a subtle shift in the quality of the light, a change in the shape and color of the clouds building in the west. The squall line she had been tracking was developing faster than predicted, its top shearing off into a classic anvil shape, a telltale sign of powerful updrafts and atmospheric instability. Her posture changed in an instant. The relaxed steward disappeared, replaced by the focused, efficient weather specialist she had been in the Air Force. She moved to the modern meteorological instruments, her eyes scanning the data feeds, confirming what her instincts were telling her. Barometric pressure was dropping sharply. The humidity was dangerously low. It was a perfect recipe for dry lightning. She got on the radio, her thumb pressing the transmit button, her voice perfectly calm, clear, and professional. "Erie Tower to County Dispatch," she said, her words precise and unhurried. "I'm tracking a squall line developing over the West Ridge, coordinates 9903. High probability of dry lightning strikes within the next hour. Ground crews should be on alert for potential ignitions." Her call was a masterpiece of efficiency, the same kind of report she had given 1,000 times to protect pilots flying through desert storms, now repurposed to protect her home, her mountain. She had done it. She had integrated her past and her present, weaving the threads of her old life into the fabric of her new one. Arthur Henderson and his bitter attacks were a forgotten footnote. The community, which had once viewed her with a mixture of pity and suspicion, now relied on her, their respect earned not by her fortune, but by her competence and her dedication. Lily looked up from her book, her reading forgotten. She watched her mother, saw the focused intensity in her eyes, heard the quiet authority in her voice, and her young face filled with a look of pure, unadulterated admiration. Natalie, feeling her daughter's gaze, turned from the radio and gave her a quick, confident smile, a silent reassurance that everything was under control, before her attention snapped back to the horizon, her eyes once again scanning the darkening clouds. She was the keeper of the tower, a veteran who had found a new, profound way to serve, a mother who had secured her daughter's future not just with money, but by rebuilding the past and, in doing so, building a legacy of her own. The camera of an imaginary film would pull back now, away from the warm light of the cabin window, showing the tower, a solitary, resilient beacon, standing strong and proud against the vast, dramatic sky. It was a symbol of purpose found, of a promise kept, a silent guardian watching over a sleeping forest as a storm gathered on the horizon.